Mary, thanks a lot for the introduction, and Babs, thanks for the work that you do for your local land trust. I am a land trust guy. I am a local conservation fanatic. The land trust that I am on the board of, Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy, was founded in my living room when I was 9 years old, and my parents were adamant about trying to protect the top of the mountain that I live on, Yellow Mountain, which is in the highlands of Rhone. Some of you are familiar with it. It's where the Appalachian Trail crosses a series of open balds for 17 miles at elevations above 5,000 feet. And so if you're an Appalachian Trail through hiker, you got on the trail at Springer Mountain in Georgia, and you walked for 444 miles, except for the little part in the Smokies where you're at Gregory Bald with some great views. You were seeing tree trunks most of the way, which is wonderful, and it's a wonderful spiritual experience to be embedded in the forest for that long. But there is something that happens to Appalachian Trail through hikers when they get to the highlands of Rhone and they step into these natural grassy balds with 360-degree views for 2 full days of walking and camping. So my land trust was founded with a goal: to move the Appalachian Trail off of Highway 19E and up onto the ridge lines and those grassy balds in the highlands of Rhone, to give people these magical experiences, this remove, as the Appalachian Trail purpose in its publications says, the purpose is to provide a remove from the sights and sounds of civilization. So that was our goal. Can we move this very skinny national park up on top of a very broad protected landscape? Well, like most landscapes, there were a lot of people living in it, and there were a lot of tax parcels that you had to deal with. There were individual landowners that owned the grassy balds of the Rhone. And it's easy for my nephews and kids in future generations to think, well, gosh, this is a magnificent protected landscape. It must have always been this way. Well, it wasn't always that way. When I was a kid, it wasn't that way. When I was a kid, Oscar Julian from Frankfort, Kentucky, owned Hump Mountain. Just about all of Hump Mountain. 2,600 acres of Hump Mountain. We entered into a 14-year negotiation with Oscar Julian and his wife and their children and their dog and everybody that had any say-so in that household. We had to connect with and build relationships before Oscar Julian would agree to sell that property to us so that we could then convey it to Pisgah National Forest. And once we did that in 1981, we put the Appalachian Trail on top of the mountain, which was the founding purpose of our land trust. Our land trust now has a broader mission. We work from Great Smoky Mountains National Park to that mountain, Hump Mountain. That's sort of our range along that spine of the Appalachians where the Appalachian Trail is. We've had a lot of success. We've also had some failures. There are tracts that we've identified as very strategic to our mission that currently have houses, roads on them, or cell towers on them, or things that don't fit in that landscape as part of our conservation mission. So you win some, sometimes you lose some, sometimes you get a second chance at one you thought you had lost forever. And I think the recent real estate downturn gave land trusts another opportunity to sort of reboot and figure out, are you working strategically enough? Are you being distracted by an easement that may not confer a whole lot of public benefit in terms of protecting open space or water? Are you focused like a laser on your mission? So that's really, I think, the challenge for us, because resources are meager for state and federal matching funds for what we do, private dollars. Look, I'm on the board of a land trust, and we go to the same folks over and over and over again. And I bet that a lot of the people in this room are the people that get gone to over and over and over again. So you bear enormous responsibility if you're a champion for a land trust, because your mission and your appetite is always a little bit bigger than what a reasonable, sane person would assume that they could accomplish with meager resources. However, you're also part of an amazing, dynamic, grassroots movement that has remarkable power. Land trusts in the United States over the last 12 years have protected more land using conservation easements and purchases of land, all the tools in our toolkit. We have protected more land together across this country than has been lost to sprawl. So whenever you feel like your landscape, your board capacity, the champions that you have in your community, that you're not living up to your full potential, know that you are part of a nationwide movement that spread to other countries, incidentally, inspired models in other places. And if you're here tonight, you're part of that movement. And that should give all of you a lot of pride in the work that you're doing as a board, as a land trust, as a community. Because who else knows where the special places are? The people that have been connecting with them since you arrived here, whether it was generations ago and you've driven past the same farm fields that your ancestors rode horses through, or if you're catching a glimpse of the river where your kids, your grandchildren, or your grandparents played in that swimming hole. And nothing connects us to a healthy landscape with more immediacy than water. If you have clean water in your community, somebody upstream, and it's usually you and partners, are doing what's right. If you have impaired water, you need to create more partnerships upstream, and you need to take care of the places where your kids are going to play, whether it's the Green River Valley, it's this river right behind us. Water connects us to healthy living systems with more immediacy than anything else. I read a lot of literature on how to convince people to open their wallets and give generously to their local land trusts. And we always say, pictures of water and kids. Ideally, kids in water. So I come from across the ridge with news that you already know. Water connects us to life. Landscape connects us to culture. Landscape connects us to each other. It's these shared experiences. I remember so well, maybe it was 7 years ago, 6 years ago, sitting under a tree on Chestnut Oak Flats with my friends Sam and Eva. Those are memories that we make outside in our landscapes, and if you get lucky, and it's a day like today, I hope everybody was outside somewhere today. And I know that this land trust has created those opportunities, those locations, the backdrop for your life, for these special experiences to unfold with each other. So I'm going to read 2 pages from this book. I think you've already noticed that I love my landscape. I love my home. I'm connected to it in a way that I always tell people, to love landscape is to become very vulnerable, because there's always somebody out there that wants to change it or impair it. And it used to just be the threat of bulldozers rumbling across the ridge to take out part of your view, or a neighbor cutting a tree that was special to you. Now those threats can come from far, far away. North Carolina did a good job of enacting a clean smokestacks bill several years ago to clean up our air. One of the difficulties we have in the mountains is a lot of our air pollution problems come from across our state boundaries, from the Tennessee Valley and from the Ohio Valley, depending on which way the wind is blowing. So we thought, well, we'll model good behavior. We'll craft a clean smokestacks bill, and then the TVA will follow suit. Miraculously, To a certain extent, they have. TVA has done better in the last 10 years. North Carolina has done a lot better, which has all sorts of benefits. But as a person who feels fragile in my landscape, a person who has been to the tops of many mountains, which is a place to be, but it also lets you behold a lot of threats and a lot of change and a lot of things that can weigh heavily on you when you're as connected to landscape as most of us are. I want to take you quickly to Minneapolis, North Carolina, outside Minneapolis, North Carolina, to what all the locals call Dogtown. So you would never tell somebody in Spruce Pine or Burnsville, if they ask where you live, you would never say, I live in Minneapolis. You'd say, I live in Dogtown. And they'd say, oh, why, yeah, I know exactly where that is. That's over up past Squirrel Creek and Lick Log. Correct. Just past Gooseneck. So I once asked an old timer in downtown Dogtown, I said, Mr. Champ, his name was Champ Young, I said, Mr. Champ, now you've been here all your life and maybe you remember, why do they call it Dogtown? And he said, Jay, he said, there's a story about that. He said, it was a long time ago, and there was a bunch of dogs that come through here. And I thought, oh boy, buckle up, this is going to be a great story. But that was it. That was the story. A long time ago, there was a bunch of dogs come through here. All right, so I live up the valley floor. Winter claws at the ridges. I'm reading this passage because I can't help but notice the springtime that is unfolding outside the windows and on my drive. I woke up this morning at 4,800 feet elevation, and there is not a leaf on a tree. So I am mighty excited to be here right now. So I'm going to celebrate the passage of the season with you in a page and a half here.
What page are you on?
I'm on page 216. Winter claws at the ridges and valleys of the Appalachians, and it is slow to loosen its grip. Some nights the old pine and chestnut wood in my house seems to grow brittle in the frigid air. There's a real fear during storms that the nails will pop. The whole affair will shatter like so much glass. In the coldest months, I move into the loft above my kitchen to work and sleep tucked beneath the rafters, because that is where all the heat in the house pools. With the sun low on the horizon, I often wear sunglasses inside the house, especially when it snows, because at this elevation, it's like living in a dazzling snow globe. My eyes water and burn with the glare. And in late February, the ice continues to accrue in the high elevations. The snows drift onto the eastern and southern sides of the grassy balds, driven off the tops by the lethal winds that come ransacking down from the north and the northwest. The weak winter sun never climbs high enough to chase the dark from the valleys. The hollers store cold air like dammed creeks hold water. The ground shows no sign of living, of ever greening again. But by early March, the odd day reminds you of the southerly nature of the place. The icy morning turns into a warm afternoon on the ridges. The sun feels hot on the face. And when the wind swings from the south, you can smell the piney woods of Georgia and the red clay of Alabama. The seeps and the drainages are the first to green up. Then the carpet of wildflowers seems to weave itself outward toward the ridges and upward towards the summits. There comes a day when the fringed phacelia blankets the haggard ground like a jeweled throw. The little white parasols nodding in breezes, and trout lilies appear overnight, their speckled leaves firm and mottled with bronze and green. It's hard to believe they make no noise, so audacious is their arrival. Some old-timers remember when the springtime slopes were draped with a sea of creamy chestnut blossoms, when that great tree lorded over the forest. felled by a blight in the years after the Great Depression, no chestnut trees stand anymore, though the stumps do sprout. No blossoms, just stumps and sprouts, and dead leaners reclining against other trees. Now, the dogwoods with their wound of Christ flowers are disappearing from Appalachia too. A fungus from Asia attacks them in the cool, moist highlands, on the steep hillsides, the northern exposures. They're already gone from these places. The stream banks are bereft of their signature beauty. But the cherry trees still bloom, as does the shad bush. Sarvis around here, as in funeral sarvis, announcing the ground is soft enough, finally, for burying the winter dead. The most astonishing values of green burst from supple limbs of beeches and maples, and then, at last, the oaks and the mice pour out of their winter homes and dart into the fields seeking seeds. The hawks come to see about that. So I've shared with you my love for my place, my home, my landscape, my forest, and that's what I was doing one day, enjoying my place, trying to find my fictional voice, sitting at my typewriter. I had an electric typewriter. I loved the feel of those keys and the hum of the little motor in it. And my telephone rang, and a very articulate woman told me that the Mining Act of 1971 was being violated behind her house. She got my name at the grocery store. It's where you find stuff out. You ask around in the produce section, said, I need a lawyer because the Mining Act's being violated behind my house. And a neighbor of mine said, well, call Jay Leutze. He's madder than hell about it. So I got this telephone call from this woman, and she said, I've got evidence to prove all these violations. I said, well, I'd like to meet you. So when I met her the next day, I learned that indeed she was a very articulate woman. She was also a 14-year-old girl who had read the Mining Act of 1971 on the dial-up internet connection that her Uncle Curly and her Aunt Ollie had given her for her birthday. And she lived in a defunct auto repair shop at the head of the Gap there, just above Dogtown. And Paul Brown's mining company was set on tearing Bellevue Mountain down over the terms of a 99-year lease, and the state of North Carolina had given them a permit to do it. So I knew already we had lost this case. And I told Ashley and Ollie, her aunt, I said, look, I'm not actually a lawyer. I have a law degree, but I'm not a practicing attorney. And Ollie Cox said to me, well, honey, you're the best we got. Oh, no, we're in trouble now. So without going into too much more detail about the book and the story that it recounts, I spent the next 4 years of my life in courtrooms. Now, why would any person do it? Is this the same thing that you would do if you were invested in your landscape, as each of you are? And if your land trust had been formed in your own living room when you were a kid with a strategic purpose of protecting the grassy balls of the highlands of Rhone and moving the Appalachian Trail onto Hump Mountain for obvious reasons, because Grandfather Mountain is due east. The New River headwaters, Three Tops, Snake Mountain, Elk Knob are off to your left. Linville Gorge Wilderness, clearly visible, Hawksbill and Table Rock, the long ridge where Wild Acres is above Spruce Pine, and then Mount Mitchell, the highest mountain in the eastern United States. Then if you turn around, Roan High Bluff and Roan High Knob, Unaka Mountain. That is worth fighting for. Now, had I known on day one when I met Ashley and Ollie that this was going to take 4 years of my life, I would have had a difficult decision to make, but that's not how you do it. You don't know. You can't know. You go inch by inch. You go acre by acre. And so Ollie Cox, who is a remarkable woman, she had 1 year of college. She worked at Banner Glove Factory, had no pension, but she had rescued her niece Ashley from her brother, who was a meth dealer, and dragged her across the road to live with her in this kooky old auto repair shop that they'd converted into a house. And Ollie Cox said, Jay, that mining company is trying to tear down Bellevue Mountain, and we're going to stand it up. So she did not say stand up that mountain, but I heard what she said, and I shaped that into my title of my book. And my editor at Simon & Schuster, when we fussed about the jacket, which I didn't really like the jacket because they said it was going to be like a watercolor of a person on a mountain with, you know, scenery, and they didn't tell me it was going to be me. And he said, well, what don't you like about that? I said, well, it seems self-aggrandizing to have a picture of yourself on your own book. And he said, well, Jay, you just wrote 400 pages about yourself. How much more self-aggrandizing can you be? So that was a good point. But he said, you don't get to choose the cover art on the jacket. He said, you're one of the few writers we've had come through Scribner while I've been here that gets to keep their title. So they loved this title, and I'm so glad that they did, because the title, I think, is one of the moments in the book. It's one of the things that continues to inspire people. Most book tours, I would hazard to say, last for between a month and 6 weeks. That's a good book tour. And I have been touring, talking about this book. It'll be 3 years in June. Thanks, Eva. And the reason is because every landscape I travel to, if you look at the world that way, every landscape I travel to has champions in it, people that care about that place more than others. And conservationists, environmentalists often get accused of being hypocrites, of just fighting for what's in their own backyard, saying, oh, you don't want coal mines in Virginia, but you use electric lights. You just don't want a mine in your backyard. Not in my backyard. And I always have the same response to that. My response is, you're damn right. Because my backyard is special. Not just because of the grassy balds of the Rhone Highlands, but certainly because of that in part. But because it's our backyards that make us who we are wherever I go. And if it's in eastern North Carolina, people are worried about their drinking water supply from hydraulic fracturing. If it's fruit, it's because people are worried that their elders in that community are living next to a new proposed asphalt plant. If I'm in Saxapahaw, people are worried about their kids growing up with neurological disorders because they live close to a medical waste incinerator that's been violating its permits for the past 12 years. So wherever I go, wherever I take the story, I run into people who care more about their own backyard. And that leaves me really inspired. So I want to thank Mary for inviting me here. I want to thank all of you for what you're doing, because I am not just a citizen of Dogtown and of Avery County. But as Mary said, I'll be in Washington tomorrow, something I've been working on for the last 6 years. We do a lot of federal projects because the Appalachian Trail is a national park unit, and the Land and Water Conservation Fund expires in September after 50 years. It's the only source of federal funding for land conservation deals like the kind that we do. It's got a federal side for Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management and the National Park Service, and it's got a stateside component which paid for tracts at Chimney Rock State Park. It pays for town parks, it pays for softball fields, it pays for swimming pools and greenways and bike trails, and it is about to expire. And it has enemies. You would be surprised to learn. There are people in the Congress who believe that we have too much protected land in this country, and we should have more land available for development and industrial and commercial use. So there's a conversation going on. And if you're a citizen of Dogtown, you find pretty quickly that you can't just limit your range to the municipal boundaries of Dogtown and have much of an impact. And just like that in this community, because your water originates in a different community, if you're standing right here, your air blows across the landscape from another place. So I urge you, because you are true believers, and you have capacity, and you have talent, and you are engaged citizens of a larger world, I encourage you to remain involved. and to look to the next generation and hammer it into their heads and throw them into the creek. That's where a lot of epiphanies are born, by being thrown into the creek. Make sure, first of all, that it's clean water supply. And that is more difficult than it sounds. So that's your challenge. That's part of your strategy. I love that your giving societies in this land trust are all tied to water. If you're a river, if you're stream, if you're in the brook. If you're in the brook, you might want to move up to the stream. Make water go uphill. So remain invested in this great cause, and stay in touch with your leadership. And I bet probably a majority of you here are either members or board members. So I know I'm preaching to the choir, but that's what preachers do. So thanks for having me. Thanks.